Nobody saw it coming. What started as a routine press conference turned into something else entirely. The kind of moment that forces everyone to stop, listen, and question everything they thought they knew. The room was full, reporters, officials, onlookers. Cameras clicked, pens scratched against notepads, whispers filled the space. Pam Bondi stood at the podium, polished and poised, ready to deliver her statement. Then, it happened. A voice cut through the air, sharp and unwavering. Clarify? We don't need clarification. We need action. Heads turned. A man in a worn-out Vietnam veteran cap stood, his eyes locked on Bondi. His grip tightened around the chair in front of him. The weight of his words settled over the room. Bondi hesitated. Security shifted. Reporters leaned in. Something was about to happen. But no one, not even the veteran, was prepared for what she did next. Richard Lawson didn't sit down. His jaw tightened, his grip on the chair in front of him firm. His eyes held years of exhaustion, of waiting, of disappointment. I served 24 years, he said, voice even but heavy. 2 tours in Iraq. 1 in Afghanistan. I fought for this country. I watched my friends die in sand and smoke. And when I came back, he let out a bitter laugh. I found myself in another fight, one I never signed up for. A hush spread across the room. Reporters stopped whispering. The tension shifted, growing sharper. Lawson took a step forward. His cap, faded and frayed, barely clung to his head. I have brothers who can't get appointments. They're sick, they're struggling, and the VA won't return their calls. We were promised care, promised support. His voice cracked, but he pushed through. And now you're telling us there's no money? That we need to cut back? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few heads nodded, others turned toward Bondi. She didn't move. Her hands gripped the podium, fingers pressing into the surface. She exhaled slowly. Lawson wasn't finished. I buried my best friend last month, he said, shaking his head. Heart failure. He tried for 2 years to get help. 2 damn years. They kept pushing him down the list, telling him to wait. He never made it. Someone near the back muttered, unbelievable. Lawson pointed toward Bondi. You stand up here, telling us you understand? You don't. His voice grew rougher. You politicians love shaking our hands when you need votes. But when we come to you broken, sick, dying, you give us paperwork and budget cuts. A single clap echoed from somewhere in the room. Another voice murmured, he's right. Security shifted near the doors. The energy in the room was changing. Bondi's lips pressed together, her posture tense but steady. Lawson's chest rose and fell, emotion thick in his throat. Tell me, he said, quieter now but no less firm. How many more of us have to die waiting? The silence was suffocating. Bondi didn't look at her staff, didn't glance at the cameras, didn't shift her weight. She met his eyes. Bondi didn't shift her weight. She didn't glance at her staff, didn't scan the crowd for support. Instead, she did something no one expected. She stepped away from the podium, just enough to make it clear she wasn't using it as a shield. You're right, she said. Her voice was steady, but lower now. The room reacted instantly. Reporters leaned forward. A murmur passed through the crowd. Lawson's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across his face. He had expected excuses, deflection, anything but this. Bondi met his stare. We talk a lot, she continued. We issue statements. We hold press conferences. But I want to hear what's really happening. Right now. From you. The tension shifted. It wasn't gone, but something in the air felt different. Lawson hesitated. He adjusted his cap, fingers brushing over the worn fabric. His stance loosened slightly, like he wasn't sure if he was being pulled into a trap or given an opening he never thought he'd have. You want to hear it? His voice carried skepticism. I wouldn't have asked otherwise, Bondi replied. Lawson let out a slow breath. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, gathering his thoughts. Then, he spoke. I had a friend, he said. Mike Davidson, Marine, served in Desert Storm. A year ago, he started having chest pains. Nothing major at first, just tightness, a little discomfort. He went to the VA. They told him it was stress. Sent him home with ibuprofen. Bondi didn't interrupt. Lawson's jaw clenched. 2 months later, he collapsed in his kitchen. His wife found him. Massive heart attack. Turns out it wasn't stress. It was a blocked artery. But because he was just another name on a waiting list, he didn't get the tests. He didn't get the treatment. He exhaled sharply. And now he's dead. The room was still. From somewhere in the back, a quiet voice muttered, "Jesus." Lawson shook his head. "And that's just one. You want more? I got plenty." He ran a hand over his face, eyes dark with frustration. "My buddy Ray, Vietnam vet. Lost his leg in '68. Last year, he got an infection in his prosthetic socket. Went to the VA. They kept him waiting. 8 damn hours. By the time they saw him, the infection had spread. They had to take the rest of his leg." Bondi's fingers curled slightly at her sides. Lawson let out a breath. That man was one of the toughest guys I knew. Now he's stuck in a nursing home, wasting away in a recliner because the system failed him. Silence. Bondi took a slow step forward. "I don't have an easy answer," she said. "And I won't insult you by pretending I do." Lawson folded his arms. "Then what are you going to do?" She didn't hesitate. "I want names," she said. "I want cases. I want real people. And I'm taking them straight to the people in charge of fixing this mess." Lawson's fingers curled around the edge of his chair. His voice, steady but thick with emotion, filled the silent room. "You want names?" he asked. "Let's start with Mike Davidson." He took a slow breath, his eyes fixed on Bondi. Marine. Served in Desert Storm. Tough guy, never complained about anything. A year ago, he started having chest pains. Nothing dramatic, just a little pressure now and then. His wife told him to get it checked out, so he went to the VA. They told him it was stress. Told him to take some ibuprofen and go home. Lawson's hands clenched into fists. 2 months later, he dropped dead in his kitchen. His wife found him on the floor, clutching his chest. Massive heart attack. His voice wavered but didn't break. Turns out it wasn't stress. It was a blocked artery. Something they could have caught. Something they could have fixed. But they didn't. A sharp inhale came from somewhere in the audience. Lawson shook his head. You know what they told his wife when she asked why he never got tested? He let out a bitter laugh. They told her, "We were backed up. There was a wait list." A wait list. The words hung heavy in the air. Bondi's jaw tightened. Lawson glanced around the room. And Mike? He became another number. Just another veteran who died waiting. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone near the back whispered, "That's messed up." Lawson exhaled, his shoulders stiff. "You want another one?" Bondi nodded. "Go ahead." He adjusted his cap. Ray Jefferson. Vietnam vet. Lost his leg in '68. Guy never let it slow him down. He worked, raised a family, lived a damn good life. A pause. Last year, he got an infection in his prosthetic socket. Nothing too serious, at first. Went to the VA to get it checked. They told him to wait. Lawson's voice dropped lower. He sat in that waiting room for 8 hours. 8 hours. He swallowed hard. By the time they saw him, the infection had spread. They had to take the rest of his leg. The room was so still, even the cameras barely made a sound. Lawson's lips pressed together. That man used to be the strongest guy I knew. Now he's stuck in some nursing home, sitting in a recliner, wasting away. Not because of war. Not because of old age. Because the system failed him. He let the words sink in. Bondi didn't move. The silence stretched. Lawson's hands trembled slightly, but his voice stayed firm. "I don't need to stand here and beg for pity. I don't want sympathy. His eyes locked onto Bondi's. I just want to know how the hell we got here. How we went from heroes to burdens. A single clap echoed in the back of the room. Another voice murmured, "His damn right." For the first time, Bondi's expression wavered. Bondi didn't blink. She didn't defend, didn't shift the blame. She did something no one expected. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small notepad. "I want names," she said. "I want cases. I want real people. And I'm taking them straight to the people who can fix this." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lawson's brows knit together, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "You, what?" he asked, arms still crossed, jaw tight. Bondi stepped forward, closing the space between them just enough to make it clear. This wasn't for show. "You said the system is broken," she continued. "I want to see exactly how, where, and why." The room shifted. It wasn't just about frustration anymore. Something different was unfolding. Lawson studied her, as if searching for the usual signs. Empty words, political deflection. But she didn't waver. He let out a slow breath, then reached into his jacket. Pulled out a small, worn piece of paper. "This is a list of guys in my unit," he said. "Men who are still fighting, just not on a battlefield. Some can't get appointments. Some have been denied care. Some didn't make it long enough to see a doctor." Bondi extended her notepad. "Give me their names." A few gasps came from the audience. This wasn't a rehearsed moment. Lawson hesitated, fingers gripping the paper tighter. "Why should I trust you?" he asked, voice low. Bondi's eyes stayed locked on his. "Because I wouldn't be standing here if I wasn't serious." A long beat passed. Then, slowly, Lawson handed over the paper. She took it, flipping through the names scribbled across it. Some had notes beside them, denied benefits. PTSD claim rejected. 18-month waitlist. No response from VA. Her grip on the notepad tightened. She looked up. "How many more?" Lawson's expression hardened. "Plenty." Bondi nodded. "Then let's start here." Reporters typed furiously. Cameras zoomed in. For the first time in that room, the conversation had changed. Angela Hayes stepped forward, her voice steady but strained. "I'm one of them," she said. All eyes turned to her. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. Her navy blue t-shirt bore a faded army emblem, her salt and pepper hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She crossed her arms, shoulders stiff. "2 tours in Iraq," she continued. "Came home with injuries that didn't seem like much at first. Over time, they got worse. Filed for disability. Got denied." Bondi turned toward her, listening. "They said my injuries weren't directly related to combat." Angela let out a bitter laugh. "I appealed. That was 4 years ago." Her jaw clenched. "I haven't heard a damn thing since." A sharp silence followed. Bondi reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her phone, and dialed. The room tensed. She put the call on speaker. A ringing sound filled the space. 1 beat. 2. 3. Veterans Affairs Office, Tampa Regional Branch. "This is Lisa speaking." Bondi's tone was firm. "Lisa, this is Pam Bondi. I'm standing here with Angela Hayes, a veteran whose appeal has been sitting in your system for 4 years. I want to know exactly why." A shuffle on the other end. A hesitation. Let me pull up her file," Lisa stammered. The faint sound of typing echoed through the speaker. No one in the room moved. Angela's fingers gripped the edge of her sleeve. More typing. More silence. Then Lisa cleared her throat. "Okay, I have her file here," she said. "It looks like Ms. Hayes' claim was initially denied due to a lack of direct combat-related injury documentation." Angela's fists tightened. Lisa continued, voice unsteady. "Then her appeal was marked for review in early 2021. But, a pause. It was closed due to a clerical error." The words hung in the air like a hammer drop. Angela's face twisted in confusion. "Wait, what?" Lawson let out a curse under his breath. A few reporters exchanged stunned glances, fingers flying across keyboards. Bondi's expression hardened. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "this woman's appeal was closed by mistake, and no one told her?" Lisa's voice grew smaller. It should have been refiled automatically, but I don't see any record of that happening." Angela let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "So I've been waiting 4 years over a mistake." Lisa stammered. I don't." Bondi cut in. "Who's in charge of these appeals?" A long pause. Then Lisa muttered, "That would be Director Mason." Bondi didn't hesitate. "I want his number." Another silence. I don't think I can." "I was Attorney General of this state," Bondi said, voice firm. "I know what you can and can't do. I'm asking for a direct contact to the person responsible for fixing this." Lisa swallowed audibly. "I can have him call you." "No," Bondi said. "I'll call him. And while you're at it, I want this claim reopened today." The weight of her words sank in. Angela stared at her, still processing what had just happened. Lawson exhaled, shaking his head. "I'll be damned." The internet exploded. Clips of the confrontation flooded social media. Bondi's sharp tone. Lawson's raw anger. Angela's disbelief as she realized she had waited 4 years over a mistake. It spread fast, faster than anyone expected. News outlets picked up the story. Pam Bondi calls VA office live, stuns everyone. Veterans speak out after bombshell press conference. Some called it a defining moment. Others called it political theater. Comment sections filled with voices from veterans across the country. Finally, someone is listening. This isn't new. This has been happening for years. I fought for this country. I got nothing in return. More stories surfaced. Thousands of veterans shared similar nightmares. Delayed care, lost paperwork, endless red tape. Some messages were heartbreaking. "My father died waiting for a response from the VA. He served 22 years. My brother killed himself last year after being denied benefits. I wish he had seen this." The pressure mounted. Bondi's team was overwhelmed. Calls poured in, some praising her, others accusing her of chasing headlines. Lawson's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. "You don't know me," one voicemail said, voice rough with age. "But I saw you stand up today. Thank you." Another came in minutes later. "I lost my best friend waiting on an appeal. We need more people like you speaking up." Bondi, unfazed by the backlash, kept moving. The fight wasn't over. Bondi's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it but answered at the last second. A deep voice came through. "This is Director Mason." She leaned back in her chair. "Glad to hear from you, Director. I assume you know why I'm calling." A long sigh. "You put me in a hell of a position today." Bondi didn't hesitate. "No, your office did that when they let Angela's case disappear." Silence stretched on the other end. Then Mason spoke, his tone more controlled. "We're reopening her claim immediately." Bondi's grip on the phone tightened. "And the others?" A pause. "That's complicated," he admitted. "We have thousands of pending appeals. I can't push them all through overnight." She exhaled slowly. "Then let's start with a full review. A real one." Mason didn't respond right away. Then, in a quieter voice, he said something unexpected. "I don't disagree with you." Bondi straightened. "The system's a mess," Mason continued. "But I don't run the whole damn thing. If you really want change, take this to Congress." The words hit hard. Bondi stared at her desk, at the notepad filled with names. This was bigger than one press conference. She texted Lawson. "If you're serious about this, I'll stand with you. But you better not back out." A moment later, his reply came. "I don't back out." This wasn't just another press conference. It was a moment that forced people to pay attention. Pam Bondi may have stepped onto that stage expecting routine questions, but what unfolded changed everything. A veteran spoke up. A politician listened. A system was exposed. Was this the beginning of real change? Or just another story lost in the news cycle? That answer wasn't in Bondi's hands. It was in what happened next. Veterans across the country were watching. Some saw hope. Others saw another empty promise. The conversation had started, but would it lead to action? One thing was certain. There was no turning back now. If this story made you think, share your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge the way we see the world.